Welcome to Everything is Changing. I am Ahmetcan Uzlaşık. Perspective is everything, and everything is changing. Welcome to Everything is Changing. Today I'm joined by a guest from Lebanon, Hanin Haydar Ahmet. She's a multimedia journalist working in Beirut. Hanin, welcome.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. You recently released a documentary called Echoes of a Forgotten River. So it is about the Beirut River, and it was an amazing documentary, which we'll also put the link after this interview so that more people could watch it. I definitely suggest everyone to watch it, and it really gave me the goosebumps, especially the last part. I had a hard time trying not to cry, let's say. And I cannot even imagine how emotional it must be for you as you're from that city and experience that river and the social and ecological things happening around that river also. So let's start with that. Why did you decide to film this documentary? And maybe for our audience, because you will explain it better, what is the documentary really about?
First, I want to thank the Amaj Alliance for giving me this opportunity to work on this documentary. I've always been interested by these big walls in the city that separate the city into two different parts through a highway. And when I moved to Beirut, I always was amazed by what is this and why do we have like a sewage canal dumping sewage into the Mediterranean. And that was an interest of mine until I discovered that this was a Beirut River. Very long, like it has a big history. The Romans used to use it as a passage to go to the Bekaa. The first city was built around this river. So the whole history of Beirut revolved around this river at some point. And then seeing it as a sewage canal was very interesting to figure out how did this happen and why did it happen. So this took me on the journey to do the documentary. But my main aim was to connect with the people who live around the river and to see what they remember. What does it mean for them to live next to something that was this amazing and then now living next to a sewage canal that in the summer it smells horrible throughout the whole summer. So this is in general what got me to do this documentary.
And so in your documentary, there's this fisherman called Zorro, who he tells that the river was big and wide in the past. I don't know how old he is, but my assumption is that from the people that you interviewed during the documentary, that the river was in a significantly different condition in the past. So I want to ask here, what happened to the River of Beirut?
First, Zorro is around 80 years old.
80, okay.
He's an Armenian. He's Armenian from Bich Hamoud. And so Armenians moved during the Armenian genocide. They settled around the river because it was such a beneficial resource to live around water. And what happened is that in the 60s, before the Civil War, they decided to canalize the river as a means to prevent the big floods that was happening. So the river is an intermittent river. So in the winter it floods and in the summer it's dry. So they used European engineers to help, and they decided that this is the best way to prevent the floods by building these big canals from the upper valley of the river to the downstream. And the Civil War happened, so they stopped the project. And then later in the 90s, they continued it. And because there's a lot of corruption surrounding big plans such as this, it wasn't done properly. And a lot of sewage was plugged into the river, and then so on, so forth. The river lost its soil. It lost its natural thread, like bank rivers. And so by the time it suffered a lot, and because of the sewage, it became the water became toxic, and it deteriorated in a really, really horrific way. But I want to add that Zorro is one of the few people that remembers the river as it was. it was big. It used to flood most of Beirut in the winter. People used to have cultural events around the river. There's one point that's mentioned in the documentary where people used to have this one day in the year where they celebrated the river and they used to have picnics around it. So they'd gather in Beirut and then walk to the river to have picnics and to celebrate this water resource. And Zoro is one of the people who remembers that. And he remembers swimming in the river, eating from the river. They used to clean their clothes in the river. Yeah, and it was used in so many ways that it's sad really to see now that there's nothing left of that.
First of all, I was surprised because he doesn't look like 80 years old at all. I thought he was around in his 60s, maybe at best. But also, you said sewage discharge is a big problem in the river. But also, one of the experts that you interviewed during the documentary said that the dumping of garbage into the river is a huge issue. And also, the actions of the factories around the river, plus lack of regulations. So many things to talk about. But is this, for example, sewage discharge and the dumping of the garbage and the waste, and plus the actions of factories, are these still ongoing things that you even observe today?
Yes, they are still ongoing, unfortunately. So the river is, we can split it into three sections. The downstream, the middle section where there's a lot of factories and condensed buildings around it, and the third part, which is the upper river, the upper valley of the river. The upper valley is somehow still preserved in some way. It has some pollution in it, but it's not as severe as the middle part and the downstream. The middle part is the worst one because there's a lot of factories, there's a lot of it's an industrial zone. In addition to sewage, industries and factories dump their waste into the river because it's the companies are on top of the mountains and the river is inside, so everything is dumped into the river.
And no one is regulating that. Like, what is the role of the government or the local authorities here?
Yeah, no one is regulating that, even though Beirut River is one of the rivers that is considered a natural reserve because it's this old and it's this important. It used to be this important. The water and electricity ministry, is the one responsible for that. And they should have a lot of water police, and they should have regulations for this industrial zone, for these factories to manage their waste properly. But unfortunately, nothing is being done for a lot of reasons, mainly corruption.
I've seen that many rare species the Beirut River is accommodating. So what is your own experience, Hanin, with the river? You're from Lebanon. You have been living in Beirut. You have seen, before you released this documentary, what was your relationship with the river on a personal level?
So for me, I did not grow up in Beirut, and that's why it was eye-catching when I moved to Beirut, because when I started working on this documentary, I started asking a lot of my friends, like, have you noticed this? Do you know what is that? Do you know what are these walls? And it's, as I mentioned it before, the river was not only removed from this resource was not only removed from our city, but the thought of it was also removed. The memory of the river was also erased because no one actually thinks of the river on a daily basis or of these sewage walls, these canals. And that's why it was interesting to me, because when I moved to Beirut, it was eye-catching to me, like, why do we have these big canals in the river?
So people got used to it, you said, because if I'm not mistaken, the walls were built during 1960s?
Yeah. It was built in the 1960s, and still people, like, from the interviews that I've done from the field visits, people don't remember or don't think of the river on a daily basis. They just think that, okay, thank God we don't have floods, but this is the reality now. We don't want anything to change, because if it might changes, it might be for the worse. So let's keep it this way, maybe. I've heard that from so many people on the ground living next to the river. But yeah, people don't really care, because there's a lot of other problems in the city that affect people on a different level, like food security, electricity, garbage waste, all of that. Let them, it's not on the priority list anymore. We can say that.
So you interviewed many elderly people in your documentary to get to know more about their experience with the river. How old are you, by the way?
I'm 25.
25. So even if you were born and raised in Beirut, you wouldn't remember the old days of the river. But one person said something really, I believe, striking in the documentary. Jamil Kassim said that you can sum up the river in one word: pollution.
Yeah.
And it gave me the goosebumps, and it was a really striking one sentence summary of the situation. During your interviews with the elderly people, how do they feel? How do they feel about the river? For example, you said, which is I think very important, that the walls, when the walls weren't there, people used to go to river to spend some time, like picnics, walking around the river, and so on.
Yeah, I will quote George Garius on this one, the expert I interviewed as well in the documentary. And he said, like, the river was erased from our memory because of these walls. Because if you can't see the river, if you can't see the water inside, how can you remember to actually think of it or try to work on it? Because the walls are so high, you can only see the river from a bridge. And Jamil Qasim, he grew up and he was born in his early teenage years. The walls were built, so he doesn't also remember that much of the river. But he said maybe they built these walls to hide the pollution and to hide the general review of how bad the river was getting because of sewage and industrial waste and all of that. So I think one of the things that the government was also engineering, not only to help manage the floods, but they also gained a lot of lands. They built a lot of highways, and now they rent these lands to all of these informal settlements around the river, NGO headquarters, informal souks, and they rent it to companies as well. So the government made a lot of money from canalizing this river. And as also in the documentary, it's mentioned that this was also a political agenda to canalize this river, because the people that were living around the river were from a very low socio-economic backgrounds. So they didn't care of what or how they will be impacted by this canalization. If you compare the canalization of the river as architectural project and you compare it to downtown Beirut, you can see the difference in how they cared about the people living there or about the investment on return on this project. So the canalization of the river was something that was done, I think, haphazardly and to gain money and land, and not considering the people that lived there.
Maybe they're even happy that the low income people are right now gathered around the river, not in the downtown. In your documentary, it said mostly Armenians and Kurds have been living around the river.
And yeah,
Which is also brings us what I would like to ask. Who is responsible here? I know that it is not an easy question. You could maybe say the government is responsible because of lack of regulation. You could say, I would say the factories and the industries are a big part of this problem. And then people, maybe with their unconscious behavior, they're still throwing garbage and waste into the river. But also there's this another side, which makes the question even harder, because as we talk, Israel has been bombing Lebanon, invading Lebanon. And with the economic crisis in Lebanon, I mean, it's also hard to blame some other stakeholders here, as even Beirut has been getting bombed for many months now. So I know it's a hard question, but I'm just asking it to maybe brainstorm on this topic a bit.
yeah. Regarding the river, the ones that are responsible is I'm gonna say them in Arabic and then I'll translate. مصلحة
Okay.
مياه بيروت وجبل لبنان. So it's the Beirut and Lebanon water it's a formal one that takes care of waters in these two areas, and the Ministry of Water and Electricity, because there's a difference between managing river water and other types of water. This is the main official body responsible for the river, but also all of the governments that work on engineering, on the social part that takes care of the people and their needs. And it's also the civil war that happened that also played an impact of delaying the canalization and then working on it haphazardly as something that needs just to be done. But as you mentioned, yes, Beirut has been being bombed for the second times. It's the second war that's happening. And when you talk about war, you don't get the privilege to talk about environmental projects. Yes, no time. Although it plays a very major role, because
Climate issues, exactly.
Israeli also targets the rivers. It For example, in south of Lebanon, they bombed the distillation water plant that feeds most of south of Lebanon. So also Israel has a big role in the climate issues that we face in Lebanon. They're intoxicating our soil, our water,
Of course.
our agriculture in a general perspective. They're also targeting that, and this plays a role also in management, because when you have these problems as a priority to take care of, then the government will also take that as they would take advantage of that to focus on these projects and gain also money from them, and not working on things that are more sustainable or grassroots.
Yeah. As you said, most people are trying to survive. And for the government, it's also hard because they need to allocate their limited resources to so many things. But I'm sure, as you said, corruption is again a big factor. So it's a question. It doesn't maybe have a straight answer, but rather there are different moving parts, which makes the problem even more complex. But then let's move on to the solutions, because we're not just talking about negative things here. I mean, you had two parts in your documentary, I think chapter 5 and chapter 6, which gave us some kind of a hope. The fifth chapter was named, if I'm not mistaken, Reclaiming the River. So how do we reclaim the Beirut River, Hanin?
And that's the thing. Most of the work on rehabilitation, sustainability, and all of that that's happening in Lebanon mostly comes from the bottom up. So there's a lot of grassroots initiatives that work on a lot of environmental issues in Lebanon. Specifically on the river, I got to meet two initiatives that were focusing on trying to reclaim the river, in the sense that, okay, we know that this river existed in a very resourceful way before, and then we are trying to manage as best as we can what we can do to help the river to rehabilitate as much as we can. So there's the riverless forest project, the Beirut River Forestation project.
Why it is called riverless? I mean, maybe I'm not that smart, but I watched the documentary for 3 times, and it's an amazing project. They are doing this green corridor from sea to mountain. But why riverless?
Because the river does not exist anymore. It's a riverless canal, and what they want to do is to, until the river comes back, then they'd have prepared this green corridor that the river can, because this green corridor also helps the water in the river to have these natural bank sides around the river, to have these, also it's to battle urbanization and the air pollution. Also it's part of combating air pollution in the city. And their work is amazing because they've doing these landfills that were filled with also waste, garbage, and they clean them up, and they use native seeds to plant these nomad lands. And it's doing great. The trees are huge. They start from small, very small seedlings, and now they're big trees, and they are attracting birds also. As we know, also the river is a pathway for migratory birds. And this also helps the birds come back because they have these trees that they can hide in and feed in. And so their project is amazing. And there's also the SPNL, Society for Protection of Nature in Lebanon. And their work is also amazing. They're trying to have this natural reserve in the upper valley where the water is still somewhat clean. It's suffering from some problems, but it can be reserved. And they're trying to work with the municipalities around that area to teach kids that how we can reserve and sustain our nature. And they're working on so many projects to help preserve that upper valley.
And also, I think your documentary is a great example of, in that sense, solutions journalism, as you're showing the local resistance from the people who want to make a change around the river and regarding the river. So this is also very inspiring in that sense as well. So it's not just, it's not a documentary that just aims to make us feel bad and also hopeless maybe, and make us feel desperate, but also a documentary that injects inspiration. So, well,
Haidar Ahmed.
let's say one of my last questions. By the way, your surname is Ahmed.
Yeah.
Haidar Ahmed. So it's together. Okay. My name is Ahmed Can, so I have Ahmed in my name as well. People might think that we are related to each other, but it's not true. You're in this podcast just solely out of your merit. Just kidding. And I never had a guest who carries also my name in her surname whatsoever. So in one part of the documentary, I mean, I guess there are many reasons why the young people are escaping from the city. And I don't want to use the word escape here.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to add something on your command about hope and the solutions on the river because
Oh, yeah, please.
because the conversation when we started working on this documentary, the whole conversation was we don't want to we all know that this river is in a very bad position and in a very bad state, but what we want is to have this hope and this to highlight the people who are working on the river and who care about sustaining and working on all of this. So this was the first aim of the documentary. We want to highlight the problem that we're facing, but we also want to like the main objective is to highlight the hope that we can hold on to. And this is why Professor Sandra Kram joined us in this documentary to talk about her amazing research and to suggest that the solutions that she worked hard on discovering that fit this river, and it's based on a lot of studies that were done outside, and they helped in reviving rivers outside in different cities. And it can be applicable and cost efficient. So yeah.
Okay, thank you for adding that. And it's my final question. So in the documentary, it was stated from one of the interviews you had that young people right now, I guess, escaping the city with larger numbers every year. So more and more young people are leaving the city. And I'm sure there are many reasons of that, as these things are related to economy, social life, ecology, and the war and everything else that has been going on. But regarding the river, it was stated again in your documentary that if we could rehabilitate the river, it will be also a great opportunity to hold more young people in the city as well. Maybe give them a new, better space to expand their social life. What do you think?
Yeah. In Beirut, the only two public spaces, the two public spaces that have natural resources around them is the seaside, which is public next to the Mediterranean, and the Hirsch Beirut, which is a nice forest in the heart of the city, and that's it. Everything else is private property and is very limited. So having this river rehabilitated and having these green spaces around it, these benches around it, these hiking lanes, biking lanes, all of that, I think it really plays a role in having young people stay in the city to, for example, on a Sunday, what else can you do? You leave the city for a breath of air, for a clean breath of air.
Exactly.
But if you have this river reformed in a way that it can hold so many spatial activities around it, then you'd have more people coming to it. And now, as we know, the Beirut River, as is now, there's highways surrounding it and there is factories around it. So there's no really a place where you can even walk around the river. So having these canals taken down, having these lanes around it, having these water space in the heart of the city would really benefit the young people here and have them and provide them with this breath of clean air.
Well, I believe that Istanbul has, for example, facing very similar issues in this regard, as the city is full of construction and going through and going to a ecological disaster. But yeah, thank you, Hanin Aydar, for joining Everything is Changing. It was a great conversation. And thank you for filming this amazing documentary and letting us know more about what is going on about the Beirut River. Because honestly, on a personal level, I have never read or watched something about the Beirut River before. And thanks to you right now, I know what's going on there and I know what should we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it was a pleasure. And yeah, the Beirut River, like a lot of cities can relate to this catastrophe that we have in our region. So yeah, thank you.